A restaurant employee let a tireless girl sing for food when the owner arrived. In a small restaurant in San Francisco, Jake's life and the atmosphere of the place change when he meets Lila, a talented girl who sings to cope with her struggles. Her voice captivates the community but challenges the rigid values of the owner, Thomas. Can Lila transform not only the restaurant but also the people around her with the power of music and hope? The sun began to rise over San Francisco, casting a golden hue across the iconic Golden Gate Bridge, illuminating the city in a warm embrace. As the morning unfolded, the streets thrummed with the familiar sounds of city life. The aroma of freshly baked bread wafted through the air, mingling with the rich scent of coffee brewing in nearby cafes. People hurried along the sidewalks, their faces a mix of determination and routine, each one absorbed in their own world. In the heart of this bustling city, nestled between a vibrant flower shop and a quaint bookstore, stood a small restaurant called Flavor and Hope. The establishment was known not only for its delicious meals, but for the welcoming atmosphere that enveloped it. Inside, the walls were adorned with local art, and the tables, though modest, were always filled with laughter and conversation. The restaurant was a sanctuary, a place where the community gathered to share stories over hearty dishes. But today, an unexpected visitor was about to alter its rhythm. Outside the restaurant, a little girl named Lila sat cross-legged on the cold pavement. Her wide, luminous eyes sparkled with a mixture of innocence and resilience, reflecting the sunlight in a way that made her seem almost ethereal. Her hair, a tangled mess of curls, danced in the gentle breeze, while her patched clothing told a silent story of hardship and survival. Lila had no home, yet she possessed an extraordinary gift, a voice that could weave tales of hope and dreams. As she began to sing, her voice floated through the air, a melodic balm that drew the attention of passers-by. When the stars lose their light and the world feels so cold, remember, my friend, there's a story to be told. Lila's voice rang out, clear and sweet, capturing the essence of her spirit. A few people paused, their steps slowing as they listened, mesmerized by the little girl who sang as if the world depended on it. Inside Flavor and Hope, Jake, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a warm smile, stood behind the counter, preparing for the breakfast rush. He had worked at the restaurant for years, and over time, it had become more than just a job. It was his second home. He often found solace in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and brewing coffee, but today, his attention was drawn outside. Lila's voice seeped through the open door, wrapping around him like a comforting blanket. "Wow, she's incredible," Jake murmured to himself, momentarily forgetting the tasks at hand. He leaned against the counter, captivated by the girl's performance. Memories of his own childhood flooded back, days filled with laughter, but also tinged with loneliness. He remembered the times he had sought refuge in music, just as Lila seemed to be doing now. As Lila finished her song, a small crowd had gathered, some tossing coins into a worn-out hat placed in front of her. The sound of clinking metal echoed in the air, a testament to the impact of her performance. Jake's heart swelled with empathy. He could see the longing in her eyes, the desire for connection, for understanding. He knew what it felt like to be seen yet invisible, to want more than what life had dealt. Jake's compassion overcame him. He wiped his hands on his apron and walked toward the door, where Lila Saturday, "Hey there, little one," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "You have a beautiful voice. Have you eaten today?" Lila looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. I'm not hungry," she replied, though her stomach rumbled softly, betraying her. "I just wanted to sing." "I get that," Jake said, his voice gentle. "But I'd love to share some breakfast with you. How about it? I can make you the best pancakes you've ever tasted." Lila's face lit up, and for a fleeting moment, it was as if a cloud had lifted. "Pancakes," she echoed, her heart racing at the thought. "With syrup?" "Absolutely," Jake grinned. "Come on in. I'll make you a stack that would make anyone jealous." Just as Jake extended his hand to help her up, a tall figure emerged from the restaurant, a man with a stern expression and an air of authority. Thomas, the owner of Flavor and Hope, strode toward them, his sharp gaze fixed on Lila. Jake's heart sank as he recognized the tension brewing in the air. Jake! Thomas barked, his voice cutting through the morning like a knife. What are you doing? You can't just bring street kids into the restaurant. This is a business, not a charity. Jake straightened, a mix of frustration and disbelief washing over him. She's just a girl, Thomas. She has a talent. A talent. Thomas interrupted, his tone dripping with disdain. She's a liability. Do you want to scare away our customers? This isn't some place for strays to hang out. Lila shrank back, sensing the change in the atmosphere. The warmth of the moment vanished, replaced by an icy chill as her heart sank once more. The glimmer of hope she had felt just moments ago faded into uncertainty. She fiddled with the hem of her shirt, her voice silenced by the confrontation. Thomas, please, Jake pleaded, stepping closer to his boss. She's not a liability. She's a person. You can't just push her away like this. Look at her. She's got so much to offer. Look at her. Thomas scoffed, crossing his arms. You're being naive, Jake. We have a reputation to uphold. We can't have her sitting here, singing for change. This isn't a charity. It's a restaurant. Maybe it should be a little of both, Jake shot back, his voice rising with passion. What if we invited her to sing inside? It could bring in customers. People love live music, especially if it's about hope. We could give her a chance. Lila looked between the two men, her heart pounding in her chest as they argued. She felt like a ghost, invisible and unwanted. The tension hung thick in the air, and for a moment, she thought she might disappear altogether. Enough, Thomas finally snapped, his voice echoing off the walls of the restaurant. I won't have this discussion. Lila, you need to leave. I won't have you disrupting my business. Tears welled in Lila's eyes as she hugged her knees tighter to her chest. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't mean to bother anyone. Jake felt a surge of anger and desperation. Thomas, please. She's just a child. You can't treat her like this. She deserves kindness, not rejection. Thomas's expression softened for a split second, but he quickly masked it with his usual stern demeanor. This is my restaurant, Jake. I make the rules. If you want to keep working here, you'll follow them. With a heavy heart, Lila stood up, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. I'll go, she said, her voice trembling. She took a step back, feeling the weight of the world on her small shoulders. I'm sorry for singing. I just wanted to share my songs. As she turned to leave, Jake felt a pang of regret. He wanted to reach out, to comfort her, to let her know that she was not alone. But the divide between them, the harsh reality of Thomas's words, kept him rooted in place. Wait, Jake called out, desperation lacing his voice. Lila, please don't go. But she was already walking away, her small frame disappearing into the bustling street, her voice silenced by the noise of the city. Jake felt a hollow ache in his chest as he watched her go, the vibrant spirit of the girl dimming with each step she took. The door to flavor and hope swung closed, leaving Jake inside, grappling with a profound sense of loss and a burning desire to make things right. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting its golden rays over San Francisco, the bustling streets reverberated with the sounds of laughter, chatter, and the hum of everyday life. Inside the cozy confines of flavor and hope, the rich aroma of freshly baked bread and brewing coffee mingled in the air, creating an inviting atmosphere that promised warmth and comfort. Jake, a gentle-hearted man with a salt and pepper beard, moved swiftly behind the counter, his hands expertly preparing orders while his mind drifted to the haunting melodies that floated in from outside. Lila, the little girl with big, dreamy eyes, sat cross-legged on the cold pavement just outside the restaurant. Her hair, a wild tangle of curls, danced in the slight breeze, and her patched clothes hung loosely on her thin frame. Despite the chill in the air, she radiated a warmth that drew people in. With a voice that resonated like a bell, she sang songs of hope and dreams, her melodies weaving through the atmosphere like a tender embrace. Today, her songs spoke of bright tomorrows and the strength found in believing. Jake glanced out the window, his heart twisting at the sight of Lila. He recognized the look of longing in her eyes, a mirror of his own childhood struggles. He recalled the days when he, too, had wandered the streets, searching for kindness in a world that often felt harsh and unforgiving. As he wiped down the counter, he could hear her soft voice drifting through the glass, and it tugged at his heartstrings, pulling him closer to the door. "Just a moment," he muttered to himself, setting down the cloth. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he was about to do. As he stepped outside, the warmth of the sun enveloped him, and he felt an unexpected surge of courage. "Hey there, Lila," he called out, crouching down to meet her gaze. "You've got a beautiful voice, you know that?" Lila looked up, surprise flickering in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her small hands clasped in her lap. I like to sing." "I can tell," Jake replied, his heart swelling with admiration. "Would you like something to eat? I can get you a nice warm meal." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, it seemed as though hope flickered within her. "Really? You would do that for me?" "Of course," he said, his voice steady and warm. "It's the least I can do. Come on, let's get you something." As they made their way inside the restaurant, Lila hesitated at the entrance, her small body tensed with uncertainty. Jake gestured for her to enter, and she stepped in cautiously, her gaze darting around as though she were entering a new world. "Don't worry," Jake reassured her, placing a friendly hand on her shoulder. "You're safe here." Just as they entered, the imposing figure of Thomas, the restaurant's owner, strode in from the back, his brow furrowed and his demeanor stern. He caught sight of Lila and his expression soured immediately. "What's going on here?" he barked, his voice like thunder in the cozy establishment. Thomas," Jake began, his heart racing. "This is Lila. I know who she is," Thomas interrupted, his tone harsh. "She's a nuisance. We don't need her hanging around here." Lila's shoulders slumped at his words, and a shadow of hurt crossed her face. Jake felt a surge of protectiveness rise within him. "She's just a little girl, Thomas. She's hungry and what?" Thomas snapped, crossing his arms. "We can't have beggars loitering at our door. It's bad for business." "Bad for business?" Jake echoed, incredulous. "What about being human? She's not just some inconvenience. She's a child with hopes and dreams. Can't you see that?" Lila stood quietly, her heart racing as she watched the exchange between the two men. She felt small and insignificant, caught in a whirlwind of emotions she couldn't fully comprehend. For a moment, she thought about slipping away, disappearing into the streets once more, but something in Jake's eyes urged her to stay. "Jake," Thomas said, his voice lowering slightly. "This is not how we run things here. I have a reputation to uphold." "Your reputation?" Jake challenged, his voice rising. "What about compassion? What about kindness? You can't just turn your back on someone who needs help." "Enough," Thomas said, his tone final. "I won't have this discussion." Feeling the weight of the tension in the air, Jake took a deep breath and stepped closer to Thomas, his voice steady. "You're wrong, Thomas. It's the little things that matter. A simple act of kindness can change someone's life. I know that from experience." Thomas's brow furrowed as he studied Jake, a flicker of doubt crossing his features. "What do you mean?" Jake glanced over at Lila, who stood quietly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I grew up in a tough neighborhood, and I know what it's like to go without. There were times when I felt invisible, just like Lila. But someone reached out to me once, and it made all the difference. It gave me hope when I had none." "Is that what you want to do? Save her?" Thomas asked, skepticism creeping into his voice. "It's not about saving anyone," Jake replied passionately. "It's about showing that we care, that we're all human. Lila deserves to be treated with love and dignity, just like anyone else." Silence enveloped the restaurant as Thomas considered Jake's words. The bustling sounds of the morning faded into the background as he was confronted with the truth of Jake's plea. He shifted uncomfortably, his mind racing through memories of his own childhood, moments when compassion had been scarce. Lila, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, took a small step forward. "I can sing," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can make people happy with my songs." Thomas's gaze softened slightly as he looked at her. "You sing?" he asked, his tone less harsh now. "Yes," Lila replied, her confidence growing as she spoke. "I sing about hope and dreams. I want to share my music with people." Jake's heart swelled with pride as he watched Lila bravely speak up. See, Thomas? This is what it's all about. She has a gift. Don't you think we should encourage that? For a moment, Thomas remained silent, his expression contemplative. Slowly, a smile began to form on his lips, a hint of warmth breaking through the icy exterior he had maintained for so long. You know, he said, his voice softer, I've always believed in the power of music. It can bring people together. Lila's eyes widened, hope sparking within her. Really? You mean it? After a long pause, Thomas nodded slowly. All right, Lila. You can stay. You can sing here if you want. Just, please don't disrupt the customers. A wave of relief washed over Jake, and he turned to Lila, who stood frozen in disbelief. Did you hear that? He asked, his voice filled with excitement. You're invited to sing. Lila's face broke into a radiant smile, her heart swelling with joy. Thank you. I promise I'll sing my best. As Thomas walked away, Jake knelt beside Lila once more, his eyes shining with encouragement. You did it, Lila. You stood up for yourself. I was scared, she admitted, her voice trembling with emotion. But you were brave, Jake replied, beaming at her. And now you have a place to share your voice. With newfound determination, Lila took a deep breath and stepped further into the restaurant, her heart racing with anticipation. She could feel the weight of the world lifting from her shoulders, replaced by the thrill of possibility. As she prepared to sing, the bustling atmosphere of flavor and hope transformed into a sanctuary where her voice could be heard, a place where she could finally belong. As the sun climbed higher in the San Francisco sky, the hustle and bustle of the city began to swell, filling the streets with a vibrant energy. Inside, flavor and hope, the clinking of dishes and the aroma of fresh pastries blended into a symphony of breakfast sounds. Jake busied himself behind the counter, but his mind was preoccupied with the image of Lila sitting outside, her little frame hunched against the cold pavement. Jake glanced through the window again, watching the girl as she swayed slightly, her lips moving in silent song. He could see that her eyes were filled with dreams, yet they also bore the weight of her struggles. He felt a pang in his chest. He had been that child once, lost, alone, and yearning for kindness. The memory of his own childhood, filled with moments of despair, flooded back to him, and he felt an overwhelming urge to help her. Jake! Thomas's voice cut through his thoughts like a knife. Focus on the customers, not on the street urchin. We have a business to run here. Jake turned back to his work, but the reprimand stung. I'm just trying to keep an eye on things, Thomas, he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. She's not bothering anyone. Not bothering anyone? Thomas scoffed, his brow furrowing in irritation. She's a distraction and a liability. We don't need that kind of image for our restaurant. Jake clenched his jaw, feeling the weight of the situation settle heavily on his shoulders. She's just a kid, Thomas. She's hungry and alone. We can help her without it affecting our business. Thomas crossed his arms, his expression hardening. We're not a charity, Jake. People come here for the food, not to see some sad little girl singing on the sidewalk. If you want to help her, do it on your own time. But Jake couldn't shake the feeling of injustice. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what he knew he had to do. He pushed aside his fear of confrontation and stepped out from behind the counter, walking towards the entrance. As he approached Lila, he noticed her trembling lips, her voice barely a whisper. Please, let me sing, she had said when he had offered her food the first time, her eyes sparkling with hope. I just want to be heard. Hey, Lila, he said softly as he squatted down to her level, trying to shield her from the harshness of the world around them. Would you like something to eat? You must be hungry. Lila looked up at him with wide eyes, a glimmer of hope breaking through her sadness. Really? You'd share food with me? Before he could respond, Thomas stormed out of the restaurant, his face a mask of anger. What do you think you're doing, Jake? You can't just feed her here. Why not? Jake's voice rose, fueled by a mix of anger and desperation. She's just a child, Thomas. She deserves compassion. We can't turn our backs on someone who needs help. Compassion doesn't pay the bills. Thomas shouted back, his voice echoing off the walls of the street. You're going to ruin this place with your bleeding heart. At that moment, Lila shrank back, her expression shifting from hope to fear. Tears welled up in her eyes, and Jake's heart ached at the sight. He wanted to shield her from the harshness of adulthood, from the cold reality that many people face daily. "Thomas, please," Jake pleaded, his voice trembling slightly. "This isn't just about business. It's about being human. Remember when you were a kid? Didn't you ever wish someone would show you kindness?" For a moment, Thomas faltered, his hardened expression wavering as memories flickered across his mind. He was silent, caught off guard by Jake's unexpected challenge. "That was different," he finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Was it?" Jake pressed, stepping closer. "You're right, we're running a business. But what if we could be more than that? What if we could create a space that fosters hope and kindness? A place where people feel safe and welcomed, not just to eat but to belong." Lila looked between the two men, her small hands trembling in her lap. "I just wanted to sing," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "Lila," Jake said gently, kneeling beside her, "you're not causing trouble. You're bringing light to a dark place. Your voice matters, and it deserves to be heard." Thomas shifted uncomfortably, the weight of Jake's words hanging in the air. "You think we can support every lost child in the city?" he asked, his tone softer now, though still skeptical. "No," Jake replied firmly, "but we can start with one. We can show Lila that she's valued, that her dreams matter. And maybe, just maybe, it will inspire others to do the same." After what felt like an eternity, Thomas ran a hand through his hair, frustration and confusion battling within him. "You really believe that?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "I do," Jake nodded, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. "Imagine if we let her sing here. The community would rally behind her. It would create a sense of belonging, something that's often lacking in this city." Lila's eyes widened, and she sat up a little straighter, hope rekindling in her heart. "You mean it? I can really sing here." "Only if you want to," Jake replied, smiling at her. "You have a gift, Lila. Don't be afraid to share it." Thomas took a deep breath, his expression contemplative. "I suppose it could draw in customers too," he said, almost to himself. "If people come to hear her, it might help the business." "Exactly," Jake said, seizing the opportunity. "It's a win-win. You can do the right thing and also benefit from it. This place can be a beacon of hope instead of just a restaurant." For a moment, the air was charged with possibility. Thomas looked at Lila, and something shifted within him. "Okay," he said finally, his voice steadier. "You can sing here, but I expect you to keep it professional. No disturbances." Lila's face lit up, and she jumped to her feet, her voice breaking through her earlier fear. "Thank you. Thank you so much." She beamed at both men, her joy infectious. Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him, a smile spreading across his face. "Welcome to Flavor and Hope, Lila," he said warmly. "Let's make this a place where your voice can soar." As they turned back towards the restaurant, Lila's voice rang out, hesitant but filled with newfound confidence. "I'll sing about sunshine and dreams and hope," she declared, her small hands raised in excitement. Jake and Thomas exchanged a glance, and for the first time, they both smiled, united by a shared purpose. In that moment, the restaurant was transformed, not just by Lila's talent, but by the realization that kindness and compassion could create an atmosphere where hope flourished. And as Lila began to sing, her voice blooming like a flower in the heart of San Francisco, the world outside seemed just a little bit brighter. As the bustling sounds of San Francisco filled the air, the aroma of freshly baked pastries wafted from the small restaurant, flavor and hope. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with patrons chatting, laughter spilling over tables, and the clatter of dishes being served. However, outside, Lila sat cross-legged on the cold pavement, her tiny frame shivering slightly in the morning sun. Her eyes, wide and glassy, watched the world around her, filled with dreams yet to be realized. Lila had been singing, her voice clear and sweet, cutting through the noise of the city. She sang songs about dreams and hope, her melodies floating gently like leaves in the wind, drawing the attention of passers-by. Some stopped to listen, captivated by the purity of her voice. Others tossed coins into her small, open backpack, a makeshift donation box. Yet, for Lila, the coins didn't matter as much as the connection she felt when people listened to her sing. Inside the restaurant, Jake, the kind-hearted employee, listened intently from behind the counter. He had watched Lila for days now, her songs resonating with him on a level he could hardly articulate. They reminded him of his own childhood, of the moments he felt forgotten and alone. Jake's heart ached for her as he remembered the kindness that had once reached out to him. "Hey, Lila," Jake called out, stepping towards the restaurant door with a warm smile, his rough hands wiping down the counter as he approached the threshold. "You want something to eat? I can get you a warm plate of pancakes." Lila looked up, her face lighting up for a moment before the shadows of uncertainty passed over her features. "Really? You would do that for me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, disbelief dancing in her eyes. "Of course. Everyone deserves a good meal, especially someone who brings so much joy to others," Jake replied, gesturing for her to come inside. But before Lila could rise, the heavy footsteps of Thomas echoed through the restaurant, a stark contrast to Jake's gentle demeanor. The restaurant owner strode towards the door, his expression darkening as he noticed the scene unfolding before him. "Jake, what do you think you're doing?" Thomas barked, his voice sharp enough to cut through the warm atmosphere. "Get that girl out of here. She's a nuisance." Jake's heart sank. He had expected a different reaction from Thomas, a man he had seen as somewhat rigid but fair. "She's not a nuisance, Thomas. She's just a child, and she's just a child." Thomas interrupted, his voice rising. "She's a beggar. She doesn't belong here. This is a respectable establishment, not a charity for the unfortunate." Lila shrank back, her smile fading as she sat back down on the pavement, her backpack clutched tightly in her small hands. The laughter and chatter from the restaurant seemed to fade away, replaced by the crushing weight of Thomas's words. "Please, Thomas," Jake said, stepping forward in defiance. "She's talented. She brings hope to the city with her songs. We should be helping her, not pushing her away." Thomas crossed his arms, his expression unyielding. "And what happens when other kids start showing up? Where does it end? You want this place to turn into a shelter? We can't afford that kind of publicity." "But that's the point," Jake persisted, his voice steady but filled with passion. "What if we turned this around? What if we actually gave her a chance? We could create something beautiful here, an open mic for those with stories to share. It would draw in crowds, people would come to listen, and we'd be doing something good." "Enough," Thomas snapped, turning to face Jake fully, anger flashing in his eyes. "You think you can just change the rules around here? That's not how business works. We have standards." Lila felt the sting of tears welling in her eyes, her heart pounding as she listened to their heated exchange. She wanted to speak up, to defend herself, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she picked up a small, crumpled piece of paper from her backpack, a song she had written, and held it close to her chest. "Jake," she finally whispered, her voice trembling, "it's okay. Maybe I should just go." Jake turned to her, his heart breaking at the sight of her tears. "No, Lila, don't say that. You deserve to be here, to sing and to be heard. You're not a problem, you're a gift." Thomas watched the interaction, his expression softening for a brief moment as he witnessed the bond between the two. He recalled his own childhood, times when he had felt isolated and alone, and how small acts of kindness had meant the world to him. Yet, the walls he had built around himself were formidable, and doubt clouded his judgment. "Do you really think people would come here to listen to her?" Thomas asked, his voice less harsh, a hint of uncertainty creeping in. "Absolutely," Jake replied, his eyes sparkling with determination. "They'll come for the food, yes, but they'll stay for the music. You'll see. We can make this place a haven for those who need it most." Lila looked up at Thomas, her voice steadier now. "I just want to sing. I don't want to be a bother. I just want to share my music." Thomas's gaze shifted, and for a moment, he saw a glimpse of the girl behind the rags, a child with dreams and a voice that could uplift others. He sighed deeply, torn between his instincts and the growing empathy he felt for Lila. "Fine," he said finally, his tone begrudging. "You can sing, but only during specific hours and no more than once a day." This is still a business after all. Lila's eyes widened in disbelief, and she felt a rush of warmth fill her chest. Really? Thank you. I promise I won't disappoint you. But don't think this is a free pass, Thomas added, raising a finger in caution. You need to follow the rules. Understand. I understand, Lila said, her voice brightening. Thank you. Thank you so much. Jake felt a wave of relief wash over him as he placed a hand on Lila's shoulder. You did it, Lila. You'll have a chance to share your music. As Lila stood up, her heart racing with excitement, Thomas turned back to the restaurant, his mind still swirling with the unexpected turn of events. Now, get inside and let's see what you've got, he called back, a hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Lila entered the restaurant, her spirit alight with hope as she took her place in the center of the room. Patrons began to notice her, curiosity piquing as they set their eyes on the small girl who had just been given a chance. Okay, Jake said, his voice encouraging. What do you want to sing first? Lila took a deep breath, glancing at the crowd gathering around. I want to sing about hope. It's what I feel right now. Then go for it, Jake urged, stepping aside to let her shine. With a newfound confidence, Lila opened her mouth and began to sing. Her voice filled the room, a delicate yet powerful melody that wrapped around each person present. As the notes soared, so did the spirits of everyone there. Thomas stood back, arms crossed, his heart slowly thawing as he watched the girl transform the space with her song. For the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of warmth in his chest, a reminder of the power of compassion and the magic that could happen when one dared to hope. And as Lila sang, her voice weaving through the air like a thread of light, the restaurant became a sanctuary, a place where dreams could be shared and hope could grow. As the morning sun bathed San Francisco in a warm glow, the bustling streets of the city were filled with the sounds of laughter, chatter, and the faint melody of Lila's voice drifting through the air. Inside, flavor and hope, the aroma of freshly baked bread mingled with the rich scent of brewing coffee, creating an inviting atmosphere that felt like a warm embrace. Yet, despite the restaurant's vibrant spirit, a palpable tension lingered in the air, ready to erupt. Jake stood behind the counter, wiping down the surfaces with a cloth that had seen better days. He stole a glance outside, where Lila sat cross-legged on the cold pavement, her little face illuminated by the sunlight. Her hair, tousled by the wind, framed her delicate features, while her large, expressive eyes sparkled with a mix of hope and sorrow. She was singing softly, her voice weaving a delicate tapestry of dreams that seemed to capture the hearts of passers-by. Each note rang out like a small beacon of hope, echoing in the hearts of those who paused to listen. Jake, what are you staring at? Thomas's gruff voice broke through Jake's reverie. The restaurant owner, a man in his late 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor, stood with his arms crossed, his brow furrowed in annoyance. That girl is a distraction. We can't have her singing outside our restaurant like some kind of street performer. Jake turned to face him, his heart racing. But Thomas, she's just a kid. She's not bothering anyone. Look how many people stop to listen. She brings joy to them. Joy? Joy doesn't pay the bills, Jake. Thomas snapped, his voice sharp. We run a business here, not a charity. You need to focus on your work, not on crying over some lost child. Jake clenched his jaw, feeling a surge of frustration. He understood the weight of Thomas's words. The restaurant had to stay profitable. But how could he stand by and watch Lila, who had already known so much pain, be pushed away again? She deserves kindness, not scorn. You don't know her story. Thomas's eyes narrowed. That's not my problem. We don't need her here. If you want to help her, do it on your own time. I won't have her ruining my reputation. Jake's hands trembled with a mix of anger and compassion as he watched Lila's smile fade, her voice trailing off. The little girl looked down, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world had settled upon them. In that moment, something inside Jake snapped. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the confrontation that lay ahead. Thomas, I can't just stand by and do nothing, he said, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. That girl needs us. We can make a difference in her life, and in doing so, we might even inspire others. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? The older man's expression softened for a fleeting moment, but it quickly hardened again. You think you can change the world with your little acts of kindness? This is a business, Jake. If you care so much, do it on your lunch break, but not on my time. Jake knew he was risking everything by standing up to Thomas, but the thought of Lila being cast aside was unbearable. Sometimes, it's the small things that matter the most. A little kindness might not seem like much, but it can change someone's entire life. I know what it feels like to be invisible, to feel like no one cares. I won't let that happen to her. Thomas's gaze hardened again, but there was a flicker of something, perhaps recognition, in his eyes. You think you know her? You think you understand her pain? You have no idea what it's like to be in charge of a business, to make tough decisions. You're just a cook, Jake. Jake took a step closer, his heart pounding. Maybe I don't know what it's like to run a business, but I know what it's like to be lost and alone. And I won't let you treat her like she's trash. She's a little girl with dreams and talent. We should be helping her, not pushing her away. The tension crackled in the air as the two men stood facing each other, the weight of their words hanging heavily. Thomas opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, a small voice broke through the silence. Excuse me. Both men turned to see Lila standing a few steps away from the entrance, her big eyes filled with uncertainty. She had overheard their argument and now looked between the two men, her heart racing. Lila, Jake began, but she held up her hand, a gesture that surprised him. It's okay, she said softly, her voice trembling. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I can go. I just wanted to sing. Thomas's expression softened slightly at her words, and for a moment, he seemed to reconsider his stance. Listen, kid, it's not that you can't sing. It's just that this isn't the right place for it, he said, trying to maintain his authority but failing to hide the hint of compassion in his voice. But music is all I have, Lila replied, her voice barely above a whisper. If I can't sing, then what's left for me? Jake stepped forward, his heart aching for her. Lila, you have so much talent. You deserve to be heard, to chase your dreams. There are people who want to listen to you. Lila's gaze shifted to Thomas, searching for a sign of understanding. Please, sir, I just want to share my songs. They're about hope and dreams. I thought, maybe I could bring a little light to this place. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, caught off guard by her honesty. He looked at Jake, who nodded in silent encouragement. The restaurant owner took a deep breath, as if he were wrestling with a decision that weighed heavily on his heart. Fine, he finally said, his voice gruff but softer than before. If you want to sing, go ahead. But just for a little while. We can't have you making a scene. Lila's face lit up with a mixture of disbelief and joy. Really? You mean it? Her voice was a melody of hope, and for a moment, the earlier tension seemed to dissipate. Yes, but keep it down, all right? And no messing up the customers, Thomas added, crossing his arms defensively as if to shield himself from any potential backlash. Jake smiled broadly, relief flooding through him. Thank you, Thomas. You won't regret it. As Lila stepped to the entrance of the restaurant, her heart swelling with gratitude, the people passing by began to slow down, drawn by the prospect of her song. With a deep breath, she closed her eyes and began to sing, her voice rising like a gentle breeze. The notes flowed effortlessly, filled with emotion and longing, weaving through the air and wrapping around everyone present. The crowd that gathered was transformed. Strangers stood side by side, united by the simple power of music. Lila's voice carried tales of hope, dreams, and resilience, and with each word, she painted vivid pictures in the minds of her listeners. Jake leaned against the counter, watching her with pride, while Thomas stood just behind him, his expression softening as he listened. Look at her, Jake whispered, his heart swelling with admiration. She's amazing. Yeah, I see it, Thomas replied, his tone begrudgingly acknowledging the magic unfolding before him. Maybe there's something to this after all. As Lila sang, she felt a warmth spreading through her chest, a sense of belonging she had longed for. The world around her faded, and for those precious moments, she was free. The pain of her past melted away, replaced by the joy of sharing her heart with others. And in that small restaurant, Filled with the aroma of hope and the sweet sound of music, a new chapter began for all of them. As the sun began to dip in the San Francisco sky, casting a warm golden hue over the bustling streets, Jake stood near the entrance of Flavor and Hope, his heart racing. He had just confronted Thomas, the restaurant's owner, about Lila, the little girl whose voice had become a soothing balm in his otherwise routine days. The weight of his words lingered in the air, and he could feel the tension crackling between them. Thomas, a tall man with a stern demeanor and a sharp jawline, crossed his arms tightly across his chest. His brow was furrowed, and he looked out at the street where Lila had just been shooed away. "You don't understand, Jake. This is a business, not a charity," he replied, his voice steady but filled with an underlying frustration. Jake took a deep breath, determined not to back down. "But she's not just a nuisance, Thomas. She's a child who sings with a voice that can touch hearts. We can't just throw her away because she doesn't fit into our perfect image of the restaurant. What if we could help her instead?" A moment of silence hung between them, heavy and charged. Thomas shifted his weight, glancing back towards the door, where Lila had been moments before. He remembered her eyes, wide and hopeful, as she sang. "You think it's that easy? What about the customers? What if they complain? What if they leave? We can't afford that." Jake stepped closer, his voice low but fierce. "What if we gain customers who appreciate kindness? What if we create a space where people feel welcomed, where they can enjoy good food and good music? Isn't that what this place is about? Flavor and hope, remember." Thomas's expression softened ever so slightly, but he quickly masked it with a frown. "This isn't a charity, Jake. We can't just give away our resources to every person who asks for help." "Maybe that's the problem," Jake responded, his voice rising slightly. "We've forgotten the human part of this business. Lila deserves a chance, just like you and I did. You know what it's like to struggle, don't you?" Thomas's eyes flashed with surprise at Jake's boldness. "You don't know what you're talking about. I've worked hard for everything I have. I didn't get handed anything on a silver platter." "Neither did she," Jake countered, his voice firm but calm. "You say you worked hard, but what if someone had reached out to you when you were lost? What if someone had believed in you? It could have changed everything." The tension in the air shifted as Thomas's expression wavered. He glanced out the window again, his mind presumably racing back to his own childhood, a time marked by sweat, tears, and relentless ambition. For a fleeting moment, he could see himself as a boy, longing for a break, for someone to see him. "Lila is not just a statistic, Thomas. She's a person, a little girl who deserves love and compassion." Jake pressed on, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "Imagine how much we could inspire others if we gave her a chance. We could create something beautiful here." Thomas's walls began to crack, and he ran a hand through his hair, contemplating. "What if it doesn't work out? What if she can't sing well enough? What if, then we'll help her," Jake interrupted, his determination unwavering. "And if she falters, we'll be there to catch her. That's what community is about. Not just profit margins and customer satisfaction, but real connections." At that moment, the door swung open, and the familiar sound of Lila's voice floated in, a melody filled with both vulnerability and strength. She had returned, hesitantly peeking inside. Her large eyes scanned the room, searching for reassurance. "See," Jake said, motioning towards her. "She's back, and she brought her light with her." Lila stepped inside, clutching a small, tattered backpack to her chest. Her gaze darted between Jake and Thomas, uncertainty etched on her face. "I am sorry," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." Jake knelt down to her level, offering a warm smile. "You didn't cause any trouble, Lila. This is your space too. We were just talking about how special your voice is." Thomas shifted uncomfortably, looking down at the floor. He could feel the weight of Lila's gaze, her innocence piercing through his defenses. "I'm sorry for sending you away," he finally said, his tone softer than before. I just didn't understand. I've been so focused on the business that I forgot about the people." Lila's eyes widened in surprise. "You mean, you want me to sing here?" "Yes," Thomas replied, surprising even himself with the conviction in his voice. "If you're willing to share your gift with us, I'd like you to come back. You can sing whenever you want. This can be a place for you." A smile began to spread across Lila's face, her eyes sparkling with hope. "Really? You mean it?" "I do," Thomas said, a hint of a smile breaking through his usually stern demeanor. "But only if you promise to sing your heart out." "I promise," Lila exclaimed, her voice gaining strength. "Thank you. Thank you so much." In that moment, the atmosphere in the restaurant shifted. Jake felt a surge of relief wash over him, and he couldn't help but smile at Thomas, who seemed to be shedding some of his rigidness. "Let's make this place a home for everyone," Jake suggested, looking between Lila and Thomas. "Let's build something beautiful together." Lila nodded eagerly, her energy infectious. "Can I sing a song about hope?" "Absolutely," Thomas replied, finally allowing himself to relax. "Let's hear it." As Lila stepped forward, her small frame almost trembling with excitement, the restaurant grew silent. Customers turned their attention to the little girl who had captured their hearts, and even Thomas felt a flicker of anticipation. With a deep breath, Lila began to sing. Her voice, pure and resonant, filled the space, weaving a tapestry of hope that wrapped around everyone present. Each note soared through the air, connecting hearts and souls in a way that transcended their differences. As she sang, Jake looked at Thomas, who was now visibly moved, tears glistening in his eyes. "This," Thomas murmured, "this is what it's all about." Jake smiled, knowing that they had taken the first step towards transforming not just the restaurant, but their lives and the lives of countless others in the city. In that moment, under the warm glow of the setting sun, the flavor and hope was reborn, not just as a restaurant, but as a sanctuary for dreams, a place where voices could rise and hope could flourish. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm golden hue over the bustling streets of San Francisco. The sounds of laughter and chatter filled the air, but inside flavor and hope, an intense conversation was unfolding. Jake stood firm, his heart pounding as he faced Thomas, the restaurant's owner. The tension in the room was palpable, and the air was thick with unspoken words. "Thomas, you can't just kick her out like that," Jake implored, his voice steady despite the quaking feeling in his stomach. "She's just a kid. She doesn't deserve to be treated like that." Thomas crossed his arms, his brow furrowed in irritation. "Jake, this is a business. We can't have a homeless girl sitting at the entrance, singing for scraps. It sends the wrong message. We need to maintain our image." Jake took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "What about the message of compassion? She's not just a nuisance. She's a human being. She needs kindness, not rejection." "Kindness? You think that giving her a plate of food is going to solve her problems?" "She'll just keep coming back," Thomas snapped, his voice rising. "We have customers to think about. They don't want to see that." At that moment, Jake felt a wave of frustration wash over him. He couldn't understand how Thomas could be so callous. "Maybe if you took a moment to actually see her, you'd understand," he said, his tone more passionate. "She has a gift, Thomas. Her voice, it's beautiful. It brings joy to people, even if just for a moment." Thomas scoffed, rolling his eyes. "This isn't a charity, Jake. It's a restaurant. We serve food, not dreams." "She's not asking for dreams," Jake countered, his voice rising slightly. "She's asking for a chance. Just a chance to have her voice heard. You say you want to make this place special. Maybe we can do that by giving her a space to sing." The two men stood in silence for a moment, the weight of Jake's words hanging in the air. Thomas's expression softened for a fleeting instant as memories of his own childhood flickered through his mind. He remembered the moments when kindness had altered the course of his day, the smiles from strangers, the warmth of shared laughter. But those thoughts were quickly replaced by the rigid structure of his business mindset. "Jake, you're being naive," Thomas finally replied, the edge in his voice returning. "You think we can just let every lost soul in here? We'd be overrun. It's not sustainable. But what if we could be something more?" Jake urged, stepping closer, his voice now a whisper, almost pleading. "What if we could show our customers that we care? That we're part of this community? Lila could be a part of that. She could bring people in, not drive them away." Thomas hesitated, his defenses wavering. He wanted to dismiss Jake's ideas, to shut down the conversation entirely, but something in the sincerity of Jake's eyes held him back. "And what if it doesn't work?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "What if it backfires?" "Then we'll figure it out together," Jake answered, his resolve unwavering. "But we'll never know unless we try. You taught me that businesses thrive on innovation, on taking risks. This could be our chance to do something meaningful." The tension in the room shifted slightly as Thomas's expression softened again, though he still remained guarded. "You really believe this girl is the answer to our problems?" he asked, skepticism laced in his tone. "I believe she deserves a chance," Jake replied firmly. "We can't keep pretending that the world is perfect, that everyone has it all figured out. Lila needs us and we need her. It's time to stop seeing her as a burden and start seeing her as an opportunity." Thomas's gaze flickered toward the door, where Lila had been sitting just moments before, her faded dress blending into the concrete. The image of her small figure, her eyes wide and full of hope, tugged at something deep within him. He recalled the joy he once felt as a child, the dreams he had before the harsh realities of adulthood clouded his vision. "All right," Thomas finally said, his voice low and contemplative. "Let's say we do this. What's the plan? How do we incorporate her into the restaurant without jeopardizing everything we've built?" Jake's heart raced with a mix of excitement and relief. "We can start small. Give her a designated time to sing, maybe during lunch hours when things are slower. We can promote it, make it a part of our brand, a Cantos de Esperanza Day. People love live music, and they love stories. Lila can share hers." Thomas nodded slowly, his mind racing with possibilities. "And what if she doesn't draw in customers? What if they don't like her? Then we'll pivot," Jake said confidently. "But what if she does? What if her voice resonates with people? We could create a space where stories and music come together. It could set us apart from every other restaurant in the area." As they stood there, the silence stretched between them, filled with both uncertainty and possibility. Finally, Thomas sighed, his defenses crumbling just a bit more. "You're really passionate about this, aren't you?" Jake nodded, a small smile creeping onto his face. "I just think it's worth a shot. We could make a difference, Thomas. For Lila and for our community." Thomas rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture of contemplation. "Fine, let's give it a try. But if this goes south, you're taking full responsibility." Jake laughed, the tension breaking as he extended his hand. "Deal. Thank you, Thomas. You won't regret this." As they shook hands, the air in the restaurant felt lighter, charged with new energy. Jake turned toward the door, his heart racing with anticipation. He could already imagine the joy on Lila's face when he told her the news. "Let's go find her," Jake said, his voice filled with optimism. "She's going to love this." As they stepped outside, the sun shone brightly, casting a warm glow over the streets. Lila sat cross-legged on the pavement, her small figure looking lost in her thoughts. But as Jake approached, her head lifted and her eyes met his. There was a flicker of hope in her gaze, a light that had been dimmed but was now beginning to shine again. "Lila," Jake called, his voice filled with excitement. "I have something amazing to tell you." Lila stood up slowly, brushing off her dress. "What is it?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. Jake exchanged a glance with Thomas, who stood back, a hint of a smile on his lips. "We've decided that you can sing here at the restaurant. You'll have your very own spot where you can share your music." Lila's eyes widened, disbelief washing over her face. "Really? You mean I can sing inside?" "Yes," Jake replied, his enthusiasm infectious. "We're going to call it Cantos de Esperanza. You'll perform during lunch hours, and we'll promote it. This is your chance to shine." Tears brimmed in Lila's eyes, and she took a tentative step forward. "You really mean it?" "Absolutely," Jake said, kneeling down to her level. "You have a gift, Lila, and we want to help you share it with the world. You'll inspire so many people with your voice." Lila's lips trembled as she fought back tears. "Thank you. Thank you so much," she exclaimed, her voice breaking with emotion. "I can't believe this is happening." The joy radiating from Lila was contagious. Jake felt a surge of happiness as he saw the spark of hope reignite in her eyes. Thomas stepped forward, a newfound warmth in his demeanor. "Just remember, This is a partnership. We'll support you, but we also need your dedication and passion." Lila nodded enthusiastically, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I promise. I'll give it everything I have. You won't regret this." As the three of them stood together, a sense of unity formed. They were embarking on a journey that would not only change Lila's life, but also redefine the very essence of flavor and hope. With each note she would sing, they would weave a tapestry of dreams, struggles, and hope that would resonate throughout the city. And in that moment, beneath the sun-drenched sky of San Francisco, the first chapter of a new story began to unfold, a story of compassion, courage, and the transformative power of music. In the heart of San Francisco, the sun beamed brightly, casting a golden hue over the streets that were alive with the bustling energy of the morning. The aroma of freshly baked bread and brewed coffee wafted through the air, mingling with the excited chatter of pedestrians hurrying to work. Yet, amidst this vibrancy, a stark contrast unfolded at the entrance of the quaint little restaurant known as Flavor and Hope. Lila, a small girl with big, dreamy eyes and wild hair, sat cross-legged on the cold pavement. Her clothing, tattered and patched, told a story of hardship and survival. But what truly set her apart was her voice, a melodic, haunting sound that floated through the air and captured the attention of those passing by. On this particular day, Lila was lost in her own world, singing a song about dreams that dared to take flight. Inside the warm, inviting restaurant, Jake stood behind the counter, his hands busy preparing orders. Yet, his ears were tuned to the angelic voice that drifted in from outside. Memories flooded his mind, drawing him back to his own childhood, filled with struggles that echoed Lila's plight. He paused, wiping his hands on a towel, and leaned against the counter, allowing himself to be enveloped by her music. "Listen to that," Jake said to a coworker who was stacking plates nearby. "She's got a voice like an angel." "Yeah, it's beautiful," the coworker replied, glancing towards the entrance. "But you know Thomas isn't going to like that she's out there. He wants us to keep the restaurant looking professional." Jake sighed, knowing all too well the strictness of Thomas, the owner. Thomas believed that any sign of imperfection or vulnerability could tarnish the restaurant's image. But something about Lila tugged at Jake's heartstrings. He felt compelled to do something. As if on cue, Lila ended her song and looked up, catching Jake's gaze. A flicker of hope ignited in her eyes as she noticed him watching her, and she offered a shy smile. It was a simple exchange, but it meant the world to Lila, who often felt invisible to the world. In that moment, Jake made a decision. He walked over to the door, pushed it open, and stepped outside. The warmth of the sun enveloped him, but it was the cold reality of Lila's situation that weighed heavily on his heart. "Hey there," Jake said softly, kneeling down to her level. "That was beautiful. How long have you been singing out here?" Lila's eyes sparkled with surprise. "Thank you. I've been singing for a while. It makes me feel happy," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake smiled, feeling a connection. "I can see that. Would you like something to eat? I can get you a plate of food from inside." Lila hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting to the ground. "I don't want to be a bother." "You're not a bother at all," Jake assured her. "You deserve a meal. Here, let me get you something." Just as he turned to head back inside, the shadow of Thomas loomed behind him. The owner of Flavor and Hope had arrived, his expression dark and disapproving. "What's going on here?" he barked, his voice cutting through the warm air like a knife. Jake straightened up, bracing himself for the confrontation. "I know what you were doing," Thomas interrupted, his eyes narrowing at Lila. "You're letting this girl hang around our restaurant? She's not good for business. Get her out of here." Lila's face fell, the light in her eyes dimming as she absorbed Thomas's harsh words. She instinctively hugged her knees to her chest, feeling the sting of rejection. "Thomas, please," Jake pleaded, stepping closer to his boss. "She's just a kid. She's not hurting anyone. In fact, she brings a little light to this place. Can't we help her?" "Help her?" Thomas scoffed, crossing his arms. "You think we should let every lost cause come in here and tarnish our reputation? This is a restaurant, Jake, not a shelter. We can't afford to look weak. Sometimes looking weak is the strongest thing you can do, Jake replied, his voice firm. She's not just some lost cause. She's a person. She has dreams. Dreams. Thomas interrupted, raising his voice. Dreams don't pay the bills. You want to keep your job here? You'll stop this nonsense right now. Jake's heart raced. He felt torn between his loyalty to his job and his growing compassion for Lila. I can't just stand by and watch you treat her like this, he said, his voice steady but passionate. What if someone had done the same for you when you were a kid? Thomas's expression faltered for a moment, a flicker of vulnerability passing across his face, but he quickly masked it with anger. This isn't about me, Jake. This is about the restaurant. We don't have room for charity cases. Lila, listening to the exchange, felt the familiar sting of tears in her eyes. She had grown used to being dismissed and unacknowledged, but there was something about Jake's words that resonated with her. She felt a flicker of hope, igniting a courage she didn't know she had. Please, sir, Lila spoke up, her voice trembling but resolute. I just want to sing. It makes me happy, and I just want to feel like I belong somewhere. Thomas paused, taken aback by her bravery. For a moment, the restaurant fell silent, the bustling sounds of the city fading into the background. Jake looked at Lila, admiration swelling in his chest. See, Jake said, turning back to Thomas. She just wants a chance. We all deserve a chance. Thomas sighed, his expression softening as he glanced between Jake and Lila. The weight of their words hung in the air, and for the first time, he seemed to consider the humanity of the situation. Memories of his own childhood crept into his mind, the loneliness, the struggles, but he fought to push them away. Fine, Thomas finally replied, his tone clipped but resigned. But this doesn't mean I'm making a habit of it. Just this once. Lila's face lit up with a mixture of relief and joy. Thank you, she exclaimed, her voice breaking into a smile. I promise I won't be a bother. Just keep it down and don't distract the customers, Thomas added, a hint of irritation still lingering in his voice. As Lila stood up, brushing off her clothes, Jake felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. You won't regret it, he said quietly to Thomas, who merely nodded, still grappling with the unexpected turn of events. Come on inside, Lila, Jake beckoned, gesturing for her to follow him into the restaurant. Let's get you something to eat, and then maybe you can share a song with us? Lila beamed, her heart swelling with a sense of belonging she had longed for. As they stepped inside, the warm atmosphere of flavor and hope enveloped her, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was home. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting golden rays over the streets of San Francisco, the atmosphere inside flavor and hope shifted. The melodic hum of conversations and clinking of cutlery filled the air, but an invisible tension loomed over the restaurant. Jake stood behind the counter, wiping down surfaces, his mind racing back to the moment when he had offered Lila food. The image of her tear-streaked face haunted him, and the weight of the decision he needed to make pressed heavily on his chest. In the back of the kitchen, Thomas was pacing, his brow furrowed in thought. He was not a man accustomed to being challenged, especially not by one of his own employees. But Jake's words had struck a chord deep within him. He had always prided himself on running a tight ship, ensuring that the restaurant maintained a polished image. Yet, as he replayed the conversation in his mind, he couldn't shake the flicker of empathy that had surfaced. Why should I care about some homeless girl singing on the street? He muttered to himself, gripping the edge of the stainless steel countertop. The clatter of pots and pans echoed in the background, but he was lost in thought, grappling with his own ideals. Meanwhile, outside, Lila had wandered a few blocks away from the restaurant, her heart heavy. She found a small park, its grassy expanse dotted with families enjoying their day. With her back against a tree, she pulled her worn jacket closer around her shoulders, feeling the chill of the air seep through the fabric. Despite the warmth of the sun, her heart felt cold and abandoned. As she sat there, she began to hum a soft tune, a melody that spoke of dreams and the warmth of hope. It was a song she had written herself, one that echoed her experiences and aspirations. Her voice was delicate, yet it carried a depth that transcended her small frame. A few passersby turned their heads, momentarily captivated by the haunting sound. Back inside the restaurant, Jake was unable to focus on the tasks at hand. He glanced out the window, his heart aching for Lila. It was as if he could sense her pain from where he stood. He had to do something. Summoning his courage, he made his way to the kitchen, where Thomas was still deep in thought. "Thomas," Jake began, his voice steady yet urgent. "We need to talk about Lila." Thomas turned sharply, his irritation evident. "What more is there to discuss, Jake? I told you we can't have her loitering outside. It's bad for business." "Business?" Jake echoed, incredulous. "What about humanity? She's just a little girl, Thomas. She has no one, and her voice is incredible. We can't just ignore her." Thomas crossed his arms, his expression hardening. "And what do you propose we do? Invite every homeless person in San Francisco to come and sing in front of our restaurant? We'd lose our customers." "That's not what I'm saying." Jake raised his voice, surprising himself with the intensity of his emotions. "What if we gave her a chance? What if we let her perform inside? It could draw people in, and we could help her at the same time." For a moment, silence enveloped the kitchen. Thomas's gaze bore into Jake, weighing the implications of his employee's words. The idea was radical, and it terrified him. But beneath his hardened exterior, something was stirring, a flicker of curiosity, even compassion. "You really think that would work?" Thomas asked, his tone softening just a fraction. "I do," Jake replied earnestly. "Think of it as an act of kindness. We can offer her a safe space, and in return, we get to share her gift with others. It could be good for both her and us." Thomas sighed, rubbing the back of his neck as he contemplated the proposition. He had always been a pragmatist, focused on profit margins and customer satisfaction. But as he listened to Jake, he began to question whether there was more to success than mere numbers. Perhaps there was a deeper connection to be made, both with the city and with those who had been overlooked. "All right," Thomas finally relented, his voice low and contemplative. "Let's give it a try, but I want you to handle it. You speak to her, and if she agrees, we'll set up a small performance. Just one night to see how it goes." Jake couldn't believe his ears. A rush of relief washed over him. "Thank you, Thomas. You won't regret it." With newfound determination, Jake hurried out of the restaurant, his heart racing as he sought out Lila. He found her in the park, still lost in her music. As he approached, he hesitated, watching her from a distance. The way she poured her soul into the song was mesmerizing, and he felt an overwhelming urge to let her know that someone cared. "Lila," he called softly, taking a cautious step closer. She paused, her eyes widening as she recognized him. "Jake," she exclaimed, her voice a mix of surprise and hope. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to talk to you," he said, kneeling down to her level. "I've got some good news." Her expression shifted, a hint of wariness creeping in. "Good news? But I thought I was too much trouble." No, Jake reassured her, shaking his head. "You're not trouble at all. In fact, we want to help you. Thomas, he's willing to let you perform at the restaurant. Just one night to start, but it could be the beginning of something amazing." Lila's eyes sparkled with disbelief. "You really mean it? I can sing inside." "Yes," Jake smiled, his enthusiasm infectious. "You have an incredible gift, Lila. People need to hear your voice. You can inspire them, just like you inspire me." Tears began to well up in Lila's eyes, but this time they were tears of joy. "I don't know what to say. I've never performed anywhere before." "Just be yourself," Jake encouraged. "Sing from your heart, and everything else will fall into place." As Lila contemplated his words, a sense of excitement bubbled within her. She had always dreamed of sharing her music, of touching lives through her songs. Now, that opportunity was within her grasp. "Okay," she whispered, a smile breaking through her initial hesitation. "I'll do it." Jake beamed at her, feeling as if they had crossed a threshold into a new chapter. "Great. We'll figure out the details together. I'll be right by your side." As they talked about the upcoming performance, Lila's laughter rang out, intertwining with the melody of her earlier song. For the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. She was no longer just a girl on the street. She was an artist, ready to share her story with the world. In that moment, beneath the vast San Francisco sky, a bond formed between Jake and Lila, a partnership rooted in compassion, friendship, and the shared belief that hope could shine brightly, even in the darkest of times. The sun began to dip below the iconic Golden Gate Bridge, casting a warm golden glow across the bustling streets of San Francisco. Inside flavor and hope, the atmosphere was electric. The restaurant had gained a reputation not just for its delicious meals, but also for its newfound spirit of kindness and community. Lila, the little girl with a voice that could melt hearts, had become an integral part of the restaurant, and tonight was particularly special. It was the first time she would perform in front of a crowd that had gathered, drawn in by the whispers of her talent. Jake was busy bustling about the kitchen, ensuring that everything was perfect for the evening. He glanced out into the dining area and saw Lila practicing her songs at a small table near the window. She was wearing a bright blue dress that had been lovingly mended, a gift from one of the regular patrons who had taken a liking to her. Her hair, once a tangled mess, now flowed freely, adorned with a small ribbon that Jake had found in the lost and found box. Lila looked up and caught Jake's eye, flashing him a shy smile that lit up her entire face. "Are you ready for tonight, Lila?" Jake asked, wiping his hands on a dish towel as he approached her. "I think so," she replied, her voice soft but filled with determination. "But what if they don't like me? What if I mess up?" Jake knelt beside her, looking directly into her earnest eyes. "You have a gift, Lila. Remember, it's not about being perfect. It's about sharing your heart with them. You sing for you, and they'll love you for it. Just be yourself." Lila nodded, taking a deep breath as she tried to calm the butterflies in her stomach. She knew that Jake believed in her, and that gave her strength. The restaurant was packed, filled with patrons who had come to taste the food and hear the girl who had captured their hearts with her songs. As the clock struck 7, Thomas stepped onto a small platform set up in the corner of the restaurant. He cleared his throat, drawing the attention of the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice booming yet warm, "thank you all for being here tonight. We have a special treat for you. The talented Lila will be performing for us." A ripple of excitement spread through the room, and Lila felt her heart race. She stood up, her small frame trembling slightly as she walked towards the makeshift stage. The clinking of forks and soft murmurs faded into silence as she took her place at the center, the spotlight shining down on her. "Hello, everyone," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But as she looked out at the faces watching her, she found courage. "I want to sing a song about hope. It's about believing in yourself, even when things are hard." The audience leaned in, captivated by her presence. Lila closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to sing. Her voice soared, a beautiful melody that wrapped around the listeners like a warm embrace. The lyrics spoke of dreams and resilience, of finding light in the darkest of times. As she sang, she poured every ounce of her soul into the performance, and the room was filled with an energy that felt almost magical. Jake watched from the sidelines, his heart swelling with pride. He could see that Lila was no longer the timid girl he had first met. She had transformed into a confident young performer. The audience was mesmerized, swaying gently to the rhythm of her song, some even wiping away tears. As Lila reached the final notes, the restaurant erupted into applause. The sound was thunderous, a celebration of her courage and talent. Lila's eyes sparkled with joy, and she couldn't help but smile widely. She looked over at Jake, who was beaming with pride, and her heart soared. "Thank you," she exclaimed, her voice ringing with happiness. The crowd cheered, calling for an encore. "Would you like to hear another song?" she asked, her confidence growing. "Yes," they shouted in unison. Lila paused for a moment, her mind racing with song choices. "Okay, this one is about friendship," she said, and began to sing again. The second song was just as enchanting, filled with warmth and love. As she sang, she noticed Thomas standing in the back, watching her with a look of admiration on his face. It was a sight she never expected to see. When the final note faded, the applause erupted once more, and Lila took a deep bow, her heart full. She felt seen, valued, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she truly belonged. After the performance, The crowd lingered, still buzzing with excitement. People approached Lila, praising her for her incredible voice. One woman, with kind eyes and a warm smile, knelt down to Lila's level. "You have such a beautiful voice, dear. Have you ever thought about singing professionally?" Lila blushed, her cheeks turning a rosy hue. I didn't think I could," she replied shyly. "Of course you can," the woman insisted. "You have a gift that deserves to be shared with the world." "Thank you," Lila said, her heart fluttering at the thought. She looked around at the smiling faces, her confidence growing. Maybe this was just the beginning. Jake joined them, placing a reassuring hand on Lila's shoulder. "See? I told you they would love you." "This was amazing, Lila," he said with genuine excitement. "You were incredible up there." Lila beamed at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Jake. You believed in me." Thomas approached them, a smile on his face that was more genuine than Lila had ever seen before. "Lila, I wanted to personally thank you for that beautiful performance. You've brought a light into this restaurant that we never knew we needed." "Thank you for letting me sing," she replied, her voice soft yet filled with sincerity. Thomas continued, his tone earnest. "I want you to know that you're welcome here anytime. You have a place in this restaurant, and I'd be honored if you would perform again." Lila's eyes sparkled with joy. "Really? I can come back." "Absolutely. You're part of our family now," Thomas assured her, his demeanor warm and inviting. As the night wore on, Lila felt a sense of belonging wash over her. She was no longer just the girl who sang on the street. She was Lila, a talented performer with a family that believed in her. The restaurant buzzed with laughter, stories, and dreams, and she knew that this was just the beginning of a beautiful journey. As she left the restaurant that night, hand in hand with Jake, she looked up at the stars twinkling above. The world felt vast and full of possibilities. She smiled, her heart singing a melody of hope, knowing that she was finally on her path to finding her place in the world.